Have you ever made a tiny mistake that completely changed your life? I'm talking about the kind of mistake that seems so insignificant at the moment. Paying the wrong bill, taking the wrong turn, sending a text to the wrong person, but then, hours later, you realize that one small error has set off a chain reaction you can never undo. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you accidentally bumped into someone at a coffee shop, and that person became your best friend. Or maybe you took a wrong exit and avoided a terrible accident. Has something like this ever happened in your life? Have you ever looked back and thought, if I hadn't done that one thing, my entire world would be different? For Katie, a successful architect with a meticulously planned life, that mistake was paying for the wrong drink at an upscale restaurant. It was such a small error, a moment of exhaustion, a misplaced payment folder, nothing more. But that tiny mistake put her directly in the crosshairs of the most dangerous man in the city. And hours later, someone tried to kidnap her. This is a story about power, protection, and the terrifying moment when your ordinary life collides with a world you never knew existed. It's about a woman who refused to be a victim and a man who built an empire on fear, until one civilian showed him what true strength really means. By the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the worst mistakes lead to the most unexpected transformations. You'll see how one woman's independence crashed headlong into one man's obsessive need for control, and what happened when both of them were forced to choose between power and love. But before we dive in, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now, smash the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I love connecting with you all, and your support means everything to this channel. Now let's get into Katie's story, because what happens next will leave you breathless. The Obsidian Room wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement. Located in the heart of the city's most exclusive district, it was the kind of place where politicians whispered deals over wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent, where CEOs celebrated mergers in private booths lined with Italian leather, and where the city's true power brokers came to be seen, or more importantly, not to be seen. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged leather, expensive cologne, and simmering osso buco. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, and the lighting was deliberately dim, creating shadows that allowed for the kind of discretion money couldn't always buy. And at the center of it all, occupying the largest corner booth like a king on his throne, sat Maxwell. Maxwell was not a man you approached casually. He was not a man you interrupted. He was the undisputed don of the city's most formidable organization, and his presence alone was enough to make seasoned politicians sweat and rival gangsters reconsider their life choices. Everything about him screamed power. His dark suit was tailored to perfection, fitting his intimidating frame like it had been sculpted directly onto his body. The subtle line of tattoos that peeked from his collar weren't decorative. They were a permanent record of a history written in blood and loyalty. His eyes, the color of cold steel, rarely softened. They assessed, calculated, and judged. Around him sat 4 guards, impeccably dressed, but unmistakably lethal. They weren't there for show. Their stillness was the kind that came from absolute confidence and violence. Other patrons instinctively kept their distance, their conversations unconsciously lowering in volume as they passed Maxwell's booth, as if even their words might offend him. Maxwell was untouchable, a gravitational force, a man who existed in a world where one wrong word could mean disappearance. 3 tables away, completely oblivious to the danger radiating from that corner booth, sat Katie. She was exhausted. The business dinner with her most difficult client had dragged on for 3 grueling hours, and while she'd successfully secured the contract for her architectural firm, all she wanted now was to go home, pour herself a glass of wine, and collapse into bed. Katie was the kind of woman who prided herself on control. Her life was carefully structured, meticulously planned, and fiercely independent. She didn't rely on anyone. She didn't need anyone. She'd built her career from the ground up, and every success was hers alone. But tonight, exhaustion won. She signaled the waiter, paid her portion of the hefty bill, grabbed her coat, and stood to leave. In her haste, her mind already on her apartment, her comfortable bed, her predictable routine, she made a mistake. A small, seemingly insignificant mistake. She placed her leather payment folder on the wrong table. She didn't even realize it until she was halfway to the exit. Her purse felt lighter than it should. She paused mid-step, mentally retracing her movements, and that's when she saw it, her folder sitting conspicuously next to a wine glass on Maxwell's table. For a brief second, Katie considered just leaving it, walking out, calling the restaurant tomorrow to sort it out, but she was nothing if not practical, and that folder had her credit card in it. Taking a deep breath, ignoring the sudden cold grip of warning that whispered she should turn around, Katie walked back. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and professional but edged with exhaustion. "I believe that's my payment folder. I seem to have mixed up the tabs." Maxwell looked up, and in that moment, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. His eyes, those cold, steel-gray eyes, didn't just look at her, they assessed her, measured her height, her posture, her expensive but practical suit, the complete lack of fear or deference in her stance. Most people trembled when Maxwell looked at them. Katie just looked annoyed at her own mistake. One of his guards, a man named Luca, whose face rarely shifted from stone, reached for the folder. Maxwell's hand shot out, a silent command. Luca froze. Maxwell picked up the folder himself. His massive thumb covered her credit card number as he opened it, examining the wad of cash she'd left inside. "This is substantially more than the price of my wine," he noted, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise like a blade. Katie frowned. "Then I've overpaid. Just take out the cost of my bill or give me my money back. I don't want to hold up your meeting." A slow, chilling smile touched Maxwell's lips. It wasn't amusement, it was recognition. The same look a predator gives when it identifies something unexpected in its territory. "The debt is noted," he said, pushing the entire folder back toward her. Katie blinked. "What?" "I don't accept payments from strangers for services not rendered," Maxwell continued, his tone making it clear this wasn't up for debate. "You have paid for something of mine by mistake. I will repay the debt." Katie felt a flicker of unease. His tone was archaic, possessive, as if they were playing by rules she didn't understand. "There is no debt, Mr. Maxwell," he supplied, and his name landed between them like a brand. "And I disagree. The debt is real. Now go, before your presence causes more complications." She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him he was being ridiculous, that this was just a simple mistake, that there was no debt to repay, but something in his eyes, something cold and absolute, told her this wasn't a battle she would win. Katie grabbed the folder and retreated. But as she walked away, her heart wasn't pounding from fear. It was pounding from something else entirely, something electric, dangerous, an inexplicable current of attraction that had arced between them the moment their eyes met. She was furious at his condescension, but she also felt undeniably seen. And that terrified her more than his reputation ever could. Katie spent the next few hours trying to shake off the encounter. She went home, changed into comfortable clothes, poured that glass of wine she'd been craving, and tried to convince herself that Maxwell was just another arrogant man with too much power and too little humility. The interaction had been strange, sure, but it was over, done. She'd never see him again. By 1 a.m., exhaustion finally won. Katie grabbed her keys, locked her apartment, and headed out to her car, which she'd parked a block away because street parking in the city was a nightmare. The street was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your instincts scream even when your rational mind insists everything is fine. She was 10 feet from her building entrance, fumbling with her keys, when the world exploded into chaos. A black van, silent until the very last second, screeched to a halt beside her. The sound was so sudden, so violent, that Katie didn't even have time to scream before 2 figures in dark clothing and ski masks materialized from the shadows. They moved with terrifying efficiency, practiced, professional. One of them clamped a heavy arm over her mouth, muffling the scream that finally tore from her throat. The other grabbed her waist, lifting her off the ground like she weighed nothing, dragging her toward the open sliding door of the van. This wasn't mugging. This was an abduction. Katie's mind raced even as her body thrashed wildly. What did I see? What did I witness? Why me? This is it, she thought, terror flooding every nerve. This is how I die. And then the world shattered. A hail of gunfire erupted from the shadows across the street. Not random, not panicked. Precise, calculated. The bullets weren't aimed at the kidnappers, they were aimed at the van's tires, at the engine block. The vehicle shuddered violently, its horn blaring as the driver slumped forward. One of the men holding Katie shouted an oath, his grip loosening for just a fraction of a second. That fraction was all it took. A third figure detached from the darkness, moving with lethal speed. He struck the closest kidnapper in the temple with the butt of a heavy pistol, and the man crumpled instantly. Katie was released. She stumbled onto the sidewalk, gasping for air, her legs barely able to hold her weight. The second kidnapper spun, raising his weapon, but he never got the chance to fire. The rescuer was already on him, disarming him with brutal efficiency. The gun clattered across the pavement, and the man collapsed with a sickening thud. Katie stood frozen, her entire body shaking, watching the carnage unfold. Blood pooled beneath the van. The smell of gunpowder and fear hung thick in the air. And then the rescuer stepped into the harsh light of the street lamp. Maxwell. He was flanked by Luca and another bodyguard, all heavily armed, all moving with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of years of violence. Maxwell's eyes locked onto Katie, and the fury in them was terrifying. Not fury at her, fury for her. "You should have been home hours ago, Katie," he said, his voice dangerously low, vibrating with a possessive relief that sent shivers down her spine. "My debt just got a lot more complicated." The police never arrived. Maxwell's crew scrubbed the scene clean within minutes. The bodies were removed, the van towed, the blood washed away. By the time the sun rose, the official report would list nothing more than a minor traffic accident. Katie was bundled into Maxwell's black armored Escalade, still shaking so violently her teeth chattered. "Who was that?" she demanded, her voice raw. "Why me?" Maxwell didn't look at her. His attention was fixed on the city speeding by outside the window, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle ticking beneath his skin. "It doesn't matter who they were," he finally said. "It matters who they work for." An hour later, Katie found herself standing in a sterile, beautifully appointed guest suite, inside Maxwell's compound, a fortress disguised as a palatial estate far from the city center. The walls were thick, the windows bulletproof, and armed guards patrolled every corner. Maxwell finally faced her, his massive frame filling the doorway. "You are a civilian, Katie," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You have no protection, and you made a mistake tonight that put you directly in the center of a very dangerous map." Katie's exhaustion was rapidly giving way to fury. "The drink? That's what this is about? Someone tried to kidnap me because I accidentally paid for your drink?" "The payment," Maxwell corrected, his voice hard. "My rival, Vance, is relentless. He saw you approach my table. He saw me dismiss you. To him, you're leverage. A way to show the city that I have a weakness. A civilian who is mine to protect. He tried to take you to either hold you for ransom or, more likely, send you back to me in pieces." Katie felt sick. "I want to go home." "You can't," Maxwell stated flatly. "Your life is forfeit the moment you step outside these gates. Vance will take you, and I will be insulted." "I will not be insulted. You will stay here under my protection until I have neutralized the threat. Non-negotiable." "You can't hold me here," Katie's voice cracked. "I have a job, a life." Maxwell's expression softened slightly, though it was still chilling in its intensity. "I'll pay for your life, Katie. Your job, your mortgage, whatever you need. But your presence here is a non-negotiable insurance policy. Until Vance is dealt with, you are the most valuable asset I possess." Days blurred into a strange, gilded captivity. Katie hated every moment of her dependence, but she couldn't deny the safety the fortress walls provided. Maxwell's men rigged her a secure internet connection so she could work remotely. She watched the news, slowly realizing how little she'd understood about the city's true power structure. One morning, Luca delivered the truth over coffee. "Vance has been looking for a way to break the dawn for years," Luca explained, his usual stoic expression softening just slightly. "You, Katie, are it. You're a signal, a mistake he will exploit until we destroy him." Katie set down her cup. The drink? What was that really about? Lucas sighed, looking almost uncomfortable. The Don's world is bound by archaic rules of honor. You, a civilian, offered payment for his drink. He refused it. By doing so, he incurred a debt to you. When you were attacked, he had to repay that debt by protecting you. And now that he's publicly claimed you as under his roof, you are his responsibility. To let Vance touch you would be to admit weakness and dishonor to every family in the city. Katie felt the chilling weight of understanding settle over her. Maxwell wasn't protecting her because he cared. He was protecting her because his reputation depended on it. She was an object of honor, not affection. But then, slowly, things began to shift. The enforced cohabitation meant they saw each other constantly. And despite her anger, despite her fear, Katie found herself drawn to the paradox that was Maxwell. He was ruthless in his business calls, his voice occasionally rising to a roar that promised swift, silent death to whoever had failed him. But with her, he was meticulously courteous. He ensured her comfort. He brought her books on architecture. He listened when she talked about her work with genuine, if intense, focus. One evening, staring out at the city lights from his rooftop terrace, Katie decided she needed to set boundaries. "I need you to understand something, Maxwell," she said, her voice shaking but holding firm. "I appreciate the protection, but I am not your hostage, and I am certainly not your property. You can have your rules in this house, but I have mine. No touching, no claiming. When this is over, I walk out, and you forget I exist." Maxwell turned from the railing, his shadow massive against the moonlight. "You have courage, Katie," he said quietly. "I respect that. But you confuse possession with protection. I didn't ask for you to be here. You forced my hand the moment you offered payment in a room where money means power. Now you are here, and my rule is simple. You are safe. That's all." He walked toward her, stopping just inches away. The air between them crackled with unspent energy. "I will not touch you without your explicit permission," Maxwell continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But understand this, while you are here, my men will treat you as the most important person in this building, because to me, you are." He leaned in closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "But don't be naive," he added, his intensity almost suffocating. "If I want to claim you, a contract on a piece of paper won't stop me. Your consent is the only boundary I respect." Katie's breath caught. He was a brute cloaked in civilized manners, and she was dangerously close to finding it irresistible. "Now, before we continue, I need you to pause for just a second. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you do in Katie's situation? Would you fight to leave? Or would you start to see Maxwell differently? I genuinely want to know your thoughts, so share them below. And if you haven't already, hit that like button because this story is about to get even more intense. The tension between Katie and Maxwell was a living thing. It coiled in the spaces between their words, tightened every time their eyes met across a room, and pulled taut whenever Maxwell's hand would accidentally brush against hers. Katie's fierce independence chafed against Maxwell's ironclad control, but beneath her frustration was something deeper, something she didn't want to name. Katie had built her entire adult life around self-reliance. After losing her parents in a sudden, traumatic car accident when she was in college, she'd learned that depending on others meant opening yourself up to devastating loss. So she'd closed herself off, buried herself in work, and convinced herself that independence was the same thing as strength. But Maxwell's presence, his solid, undeniable stability, even in the midst of chaos, was slowly dismantling those walls. And then Vance forced the issue. One afternoon, Katie was working in Maxwell's study, reviewing architectural models for her current project. A delivery truck was supposed to arrive with a crate of expensive materials her client had commissioned. She'd coordinated the delivery to Maxwell's compound for security reasons. The truck never made it. 2 blocks from the estate, it detonated. The explosion wasn't massive. Vance wasn't trying to destroy the neighborhood. He was sending a message. The blast was controlled, calculated, designed to be seen and felt without causing mass casualties. But the psychological impact was devastating. Katie watched the footage on the closed-circuit monitors in Maxwell's study, her face draining of all color. Smoke billowed into the sky. Her professional work, her client's trust, her carefully planned project, had been violated. He knew where I was working, she whispered, her voice hollow. He knew the client. He knew the delivery schedule. He's closing in. Maxwell was on the phone instantly, his voice dropping to that low, vibrating growl that meant someone was about to pay a terrible price. He gave 2 succinct orders, each one delivered with a cold finality that made Katie's blood run cold, and then hung up. He turned to her, and what he saw made him move. Katie was shaking uncontrollably, not from fear, from rage and helplessness and the sickening realization that Vance could reach into any part of her life and destroy it. Maxwell crossed the room in 3 strides. He didn't ask permission. He didn't negotiate. He simply took. His large hands cupped her face, pulling her forward, and his mouth came down on hers with a fierce, possessive hunger that obliterated every boundary they'd carefully constructed. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft. It was a kiss born of adrenaline, fear, relief, and a desperate, violent need to claim and protect. Katie gasped against his mouth, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. Because in that moment, every wall she'd built came crashing down. Maxwell pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath. He touches one piece of your world, and I burn down his, Maxwell said, his voice raw and fierce. His thumb stroked her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. You are under my protection. You are mine. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of absolute fact. And for the first time in years, Katie didn't fight it. She leaned into the danger, into the terrifying certainty that this man, this brutal, powerful king, was the only thing standing between her and utter destruction. I'm starting to fall in love with you, she whispered, the confession torn from her lips before she could stop it. And that terrifies me more than Vance ever could. Maxwell's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering behind his usual mask of control. Good, he said simply, because I've already fallen. The kiss changed everything. They hadn't crossed every line, but the emotional barrier was gone. Katie was no longer just a civilian under Maxwell's protection. She was his, and he was hers, and they both knew it. But knowing it and accepting it were 2 different things. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments, whispered conversations in the library, Maxwell's hand finding hers under the dinner table, the weight of his gaze following her through every room. But beneath the growing intimacy was a conflict Katie couldn't ignore. She couldn't live like this forever. The constant guards, the secrets, the violence simmering just beneath the surface of every decision Maxwell made. This world wasn't sustainable. It wasn't a life, it was survival. One restless night, Katie found Maxwell alone in his underground bunker, studying maps and casualty reports spread across a massive table. I can't do this, Maxwell, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, his expression guarded. I can't live like this, Katie continued, her words spilling out in a rush. The fear, the pressure, the constant looking over my shoulder. I'm starting to love you, and that terrifies me more than anything Vance could do. Because if I love you, I lose myself. I lose everything I built. I lose the independence that's kept me safe since my parents died. Maxwell stood slowly, his face grim. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted some civilian to wander into my life and threaten everything I built? You showed me a different kind of strength, Katie, a clean strength. And I am sick of the darkness. You are the only light I've seen in 20 years. He moved around the table, towering over her. You are forcing me to choose, and I hate it. Katie's eyes filled with tears. Then let me go. If you love me, let me walk away and rebuild my life. Maxwell's jaw clenched. If I let you walk away, Vance will find you. He will use you to hurt me. I cannot live with that risk. Your safety is my priority. I can't guarantee it out there, but I can't hold you prisoner in here, either. The stalemate hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Katie made a decision. If Maxwell couldn't let her go, she would force the issue. She booked a flight under a false name, planning to leave the compound without telling him. She believed that once she was physically gone, he would find a way to let her go emotionally. She was packing a small bag when Luca burst into her room, his face pale beneath his permanent tan. Vance didn't take the bait, Lucas said, his words clipped and urgent. He bypassed the perimeter entirely. He didn't come for you. Katie's blood turned to ice. Then who? He took Lisa. The world stopped. Lisa, her younger sister, her only family. A college student living a quiet life downtown, completely removed from Maxwell's world. Katie felt the blood drain from her face. He knew I wouldn't leave if he touched my family. He did it to draw Maxwell out. Maxwell appeared in the doorway moments later, his expression a mask of cold, controlled fury. He wants me in the open, Maxwell said, his voice deadly calm. He wants me to confront him face to face, man to man. That's why he took your sister. He knows I will come for her because she is yours, and you are mine. Don't go, Katie grabbed his arm, desperation flooding her voice. It's a trap. It is, Maxwell agreed, his gaze hard as stone. But he has crossed the final line. He has touched my family, even if by proxy. This ends tonight. Maxwell went, but not in the way Vance expected. He went alone, unarmed. Driving himself to the derelict warehouse district, Vance had designated as the meeting spot. Katie, frantic, watched the tracker on Maxwell's encrypted phone from the safety of the bunker. Luca tried to restrain her, but her terror for Lisa, and for Maxwell, outweighed every instinct for self-preservation. At the warehouse, Vance waited. He was everything Maxwell wasn't, flashy, cruel, desperate for recognition. He wore expensive clothes that screamed new money, and his smile was all teeth and malice. Beside him, bound and gagged but physically unharmed, was Lisa. Her eyes were wide with terror, but she was alive. Look at you, Maxwell, Vance sneered as the Don walked into the cavernous space. The great Don, cornered by a civilian, all for some woman who paid for your happy hour. Pathetic. Maxwell stood tall, his hands open and empty. His presence, even unarmed, radiated a power that made Vance's men shift nervously. Release the girl, Vance, Maxwell said, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness. You want me. You have me. Let the civilian go. Vance laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I don't just want you, Maxwell. I want your empire. I want the throne. I want everything you've built, and I want to watch you lose it. Maxwell reached into his jacket slowly, carefully. Vance's men raised their weapons, but Maxwell pulled out nothing more dangerous than a manila folder. You can have it, Maxwell said. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Vance's smile faltered. What? Maxwell tossed the folder onto the ground between them. This is a legal transfer of all major holdings, territory, and influence. It strips me bare. I am retiring. I am done. You can have the keys to the city. My only condition, a permanent sanctioned ceasefire on Katie and her family, forever. No attempts, no threats, no looking in their direction. You get the throne, I get a life. This is my offering for safe passage. Vance stared at the folder like it might explode. The offer was too good, too clean. He would become the Don without firing a single bullet, without risking a war with the other families. But the thought of Maxwell walking away, happy, was maddening. I take the empire and still kill you both, Vance snarled. His ego warring with his ambition. Maxwell didn't flinch. You can kill me, but if you do, the rest of the families will see you as a greedy fool who sacrificed peace over ego. You take the empire and you let the civilians go. Or you leave here with nothing but my body and a war you cannot win. The families are watching, Vance. They're always watching. Vance's hands trembled with rage. He looked at the folder, at Maxwell's calm, resigned expression, at Lisa's terrified face. The documents were real, ironclad. Maxwell had chosen love over power, and that was the one thing Vance couldn't fight. He needed the empire more than he needed Maxwell's blood. Vance spat on the ground. Fine, take the girl and disappear. If I ever see your face again, the deal is off, and I'll hunt you both to the ends of the earth. Maxwell nodded once, his expression never changing. He walked to Lisa, cut her bonds, and helped her to her feet. As they walked out of the warehouse, Lisa trembling against his side, Maxwell didn't look back. He had given up everything. And he had never felt more powerful. 6 months later, the coastal villa in Italy was nothing like Maxwell's fortress. It was small, intimate, surrounded by olive groves and the endless blue of the Mediterranean. The air smelled of salt and lemon trees. There were no guards patrolling the perimeter, no armored vehicles in the driveway, no encrypted phones ringing at all hours. Maxwell, now simply Max, ran a legitimate international trading firm from a small office in the nearby town. It was lucrative, legal, and most importantly, peaceful. Lisa was back in college, thriving under the protection of the ironclad ceasefire. She called Katie every week, her voice lighter, happier. And Katie? Katie was sketching on the veranda, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, a small smile playing on her lips. She was designing a community center for the local village, a project born entirely of passion rather than profit. Max watched her from the doorway, a cup of espresso in his hand. The sight of her, relaxed, content, free, was worth more than every territory he'd ever controlled. He walked over and kissed her temple. "You're happy," Katie looked up, her eyes bright. "I am," she paused, her smile fading slightly. "I still hate that you had to give up your empire for me." Max set down his cup and pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like the safest fortress she'd ever known. "It wasn't for you, Mia Cara," he corrected gently. "It was for us. That life was a cage built on fear and blood. You, the woman who mistook my table for her own, showed me what true power was. The freedom to choose your life." Katie rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was a sound far more comforting than the silence of any empire. She had paid for his drink by mistake. Hours later, someone had tried to kidnap her. It was the worst mistake of her life, and yet it had led her directly to the man who saved it. Not just from Vance, but from the prison of her own fear. She was no longer fiercely independent. She was fiercely loved. And Max had paid for that love with an entire empire. It was the only transaction that made sense to them both. Because at the end of the day, true power isn't about control. It isn't about territory or fear or the size of your empire. True power is knowing what you're willing to walk away from. It's knowing what truly matters. And it's having the courage to choose love over everything else, even when the cost is everything you've ever built. Katie had learned that independence doesn't mean facing the world alone. It means being strong enough to let someone stand beside you. And Max had learned that the throne means nothing if you're sitting on it alone. Sometimes the smallest mistakes lead to the greatest transformations. And sometimes paying for the wrong drink changes absolutely everything. So, what did you think? Drop a comment below and tell me your biggest takeaway from Katie and Maxwell's story. Would you have made the same choice Max did? And if you loved this story, hit that subscribe button, smash that like, and share this with someone who loves a good romance with high stakes and life lessons. Thank you so much for being part of Vivian's Romance Library. I'll see you in the next story, where we'll dive into another world of passion, danger, and the kind of love that changes everything. Until next time, stay fierce, stay loved, and never underestimate the power of a single moment to change your entire life.